Oh, hi. Let's talk about cannibals. Finger looking good. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below, and it'll give you a pretty good overview of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about. In short, we look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But this is our Doctorate Level series. This is where we revisit a subgenre that we've already looked at, already picked 3 movies from, and we pick a new 4th Doctorate Level selection in addition to recapping what we've done previously. So if you missed it before, this is a good way to catch up. Today, what we're doing is we're revisiting the cannibal subgenre, horror movies about cannibals. And when we talked about this in the previous video, we didn't go super in depth into the genre, the subgenre itself. We looked at it at a kind of high level and just basically pointed out how the movies tend to be about tribal cannibalism or like backwoods, like mutants type cannibals. And there are exceptions to that. There are other movies that do that. And we've looked at a lot of those, not just in the cannibal video that we did previously, but the series as a whole, the horror movie syllabus as a whole. We've come across cannibalism in many movies, but these were some of the ones where the cannibalism was front and center. It was the plot point, the major plot, or a major plot point, key plot point of the story, or the whole point of the story itself was the cannibalism. So that's what we use to narrow down the focus of the video, and we're continuing that trend here today. When we looked at the 3 movies we looked at, they did kind of give us a smorgasbord, if you will, a kind of a covering of tribal cannibalism, backwoods cannibalism, and other kind of cannibalism, a little bit more modern take on it, something like that, fresher take, if you will. We kind of hit all the bases on that, so why don't we go ahead and recap those movies that we looked at right now. The first cannibal movie that we looked at in our previous video was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And we pointed out how this is kind of the quintessential cannibal movie. People know this to be, one of the big ones, even though you really don't see a lot of cannibalism on the screen. Most of it's implied, but it's implied pretty strongly and pretty well. And it was kind of a whole conversation we had about this, how a lot of the violence is not really on screen. It's implied, or you don't see nearly as much as you think you see, as much as your brain tells you you're going to see, and as much as that title makes you believe you're seeing. And it really just kind of like you fill in the blanks yourself with what you're hearing, what you know about, what's being implied. And also we talked about how the grainy nature of this movie, being a low budget movie from the 70s, really feeds into this whole quote unquote true story aspect of that, which was not really a true story, but it is inspired by Ed Gein and stuff like that. We talked about how all that comes together to make a really harrowing, intense, and disturbing experience. But you're not seeing a whole lot of bloodshed and gore on camera like you think you are. And that's part of what makes it such a masterpiece. The next cannibal horror movie that we looked at was Raw. And Raw was a French film that I pointed out arguably could have been the new French Extremity because it does meet the criteria and it's ultra violent, ultra gory, and it also is an atypical cannibal film. It's not backwoods cannibals, it's not tribal cannibals, it's veterinarian students that are the cannibals in this one. And I pointed out how it was maybe a little controversial for me to kind of rank this as more disturbing as Texas Chainsaw, but it's coming from my vegetarian background and just kind of being personally disturbed. My bias was coming out, and I admitted that. My bias was coming out because of the motivations for being forced to eat the meat, and then how that led to the cannibalism in the movie really hit hard for me. But the gore in this is top notch. Like once it gets into the actual cannibalism, I don't think anybody would feel biased about calling it disturbing. It's a really gruesome movie that really has something interesting to say about cannibalism, and it's kind of got a message to it. So it's really next level in terms of what it's trying to do. Definitely a very fresh take on the cannibal subgenre. And the last cannibal horror movie that we talked about was Cannibal Holocaust. and it kind of had to be talked about because it's so notorious, so well known. It's a disgusting film. Yeah, I hate that movie. I talked about how much I hate it at length and why I hate it. The animal violence in particular being, the unnecessary animal cruelty in that movie being the biggest reason. I did acknowledge, it's an early found footage movie. It really kind of, before Blair Witch even sets that tone of what a horror movie can be in terms of found footage. And it did have some good ideas in there in terms of these documentary film crew going missing and trying to investigate that and how they might be worse than the quote unquote savages they come across. But the animal cruelty, the kind of touch of racism that's in there, the sexual assault stuff that's in there. Even though it's got this really good gore stuff in there, it really winds up falling short because of that animal cruelty. It really just undercuts it. And, even though the lore behind the Italian case that they got tried for murder because it looked that realistic, it was that convincing of a found footage, it all falls short because of this unnecessary animal cruelty stuff for me. And I know there's a lot of people out there that love it, but I'm definitely not one of them. But it is super duper notorious, so we had to talk about it. So those were the movies that we covered under the cannibal subgenre, but now it's time for our fourth doctorate level selection. I don't think I mentioned it, but for our doctorate level selection, we usually try to go with something a little bit more off the beaten path, a little bit more obscure, less mainstream, a little less known, and that's definitely what we're trying to do today because our doctorate level selection is Anthropophagus. Anthropophagus came out in 1980 and is directed by Joe D'Amato, who's pretty well known amongst some horror fans for his horror slash erotica stuff. He's kind of a schlockier or sleazier filmmaker, and he's kind of a little bit doing that here, although he's really reveling more in the exploitation gore aspect of this movie, which ain't a bad thing because I love me some exploitation gore. So this is the one that I tend to like, but I don't hear it get talked about as much as other movies, but we're going to talk about it right now. First, if you haven't seen it before. The movie's about a group of people, I think they're in Greece, who go to this island and find it to be deserted when they're expecting to find some friends there and stuff. And they can't find anybody, so they start investigating, trying to figure out what's going on. The town seems to be missing. Some weird stuff starts to happen. They start to wind up getting picked off one by one, and they uncover a mystery that has to do with some cannibalistic tendencies, and that might be where everybody's wound up is in somebody's stomach. But we're going to go ahead and stop there so as to not spoil the movie too much for anybody. But I'll be honest with you, the plot of the movie is a little bit on the thin side, and that's probably putting it a little bit mildly. This idea that a group of friends that meet somebody else and they jump up on a boat to go to this island, it's kind of a slow start. And then they get to the island and everybody's missing, and it's just not a super compelling mystery. It's a slow start and it's kind of a slow burn, but it takes a while to get to the cannibalism. But once you do, it's really worth it because the cannibalism scenes, the gore here is very noteworthy. It's very memorable and notorious. And in fact, this movie was one of the video nasties that was banned. It was, banned in particular for one specific scene, I think, that we'll get into in just a minute. But the movie, which has a few different titles depending on where you saw it, like it's like Anthropophagus the Beast, or the Grim Reaper, or Savage Island, which I think was what they called it in the U.S. And there are some slightly different cuts to the movie depending on where you saw it, especially in the U.K., of course, because of the video nasty situation. But depending on what you saw, you might have gotten more or less gore, and you might have gotten some additional scenes, like especially the intro, which is pretty good. It's kind of a Jaws-esque intro with a couple on the beach, and they, the woman goes swimming with the guy's kind of chilling out, resting on the beach, and then she gets attacked in the water, which is a pretty cool scene, and there's some POV aspect to it. It's a strong start to the movie, but then, like I said, it kind of downshifts and goes into this whole boat ride thing, and it takes a while to get back to that gruesome violence. So I think opening it with that is a good way to at least give you a flavor, a little bit of sample of what's to come later in the movie. So if you see the version that doesn't have that, that kind of sucks. And it might be really hard to hold your attention, frankly. But the movie in that lull period, that mystery period, if you will, where they're trying to figure out what went on in the island, it's not bad. Like the actors are capable enough. They're likable enough for the most part. Tisa Farrow, who is Mia Farrow's sister, Prudence Farrow's sister, is the star of the movie, and she's pretty good here. Like, it's a little bit hard to tell about the performances because of the dubbing aspect of it. Like, the dialogue is ADR, it's dubbed, and so it's a little hard, but she seems like she's giving a pretty good performance here, and everybody else just seems to be fine, and it's really not a problem in that regard. But it just if you're here for cannibalism, if you've seen the cover of the movie from the video store, then you're like, where the hell is the cannibal, right? It's taking a little while to get to that. It's kind of feeling like a slasher film without the slasher aspects in there for a good decent chunk of the movie. And it's a little frustrating. And I'd say just stick with it, because once the cannibalism kicks in towards the end, it's good stuff. The gore effects are pretty decent. They're not amazing, but they're solid. And the implication of the gore is really gross. Like people just taking flat out chomps out of people. That's awesome. It's really fun stuff. But the main thing, the reason why we're talking about this movie today, the reason why it's notorious at all, is the fetus eating scene. There is a scene where the cannibal rips a fetus out of a pregnant woman and then eats it. And I'm certain that that is what crossed the line for the censors in the UK and put it on the video nasty list. I'm certain of it, because it is a pretty shocking scene. It's really gruesome, even though it's not quite as gory and graphic as it could have gotten, I guess. It's still pretty gruesome, and the implication of it in and of itself is really what makes it so disturbing and upsetting. And it is the high watermark for this movie in terms of what it does gore wise. There's a couple other really great gore scenes in there. There, intestines, and like I said, there's chomped necks and stuff like that. But it all comes in like the final act. It's not spread out over the movie as much as you might like it to be. And that does kind of ding a little bit. And I think that's maybe why you don't hear this movie getting talked about as much. And also, not for nothing, it's a low budget movie. It's got that 80s grain film that like just looks cheap and old and dated. It has a dated feel to it. It really does, that I think a modern audience in particular would really struggle to get behind, to really get into. And not that the mystery is all that compelling anyway. So I can see why people aren't really super enamored of this one. I really like it. Like I said, I think it takes a little while to get into it, but when it gets going in the third act, I really like it. I think that the cannibal looks super creepy and cool. I like the ending a lot. I think that's really a good ending. And yeah, I even like the backstory of how the cannibalism comes to the island. It's a pretty solid and good explanation or backstory that I kind of wish was spread out a little bit more of the movie and kind of got into it a little bit earlier, and we could explore it a little bit more. But it is solid. It is good. Overall, Anthropophagus is, to me, an underrated movie, and so that's why I chose it as the Doctorate Level, so we could talk about it a little bit and shine a little bit of a light on it, because I think it's definitely worth checking out. If you like cannibal movies, if you like gore movies, this is definitely one to check out. And it does, because of the setting, the island setting and everything, that I think, again, it's in Greece. It reminds me of another video nasty, Island of Death, which is very, very different and taboo in a very different way. We've talked about that on the channel already, but that also might drive some of my affinity for that, because I really liked Island of Death, and I really like this movie. So if you haven't seen it, but you're down for this kind of stuff, check it out. It's not for everybody. Like I said, fetus eating, man. Fetus eating. So that tells you right there. If you're out on that, you're out on this movie. But if you do get a chance to check it out, let me know what you think, because I don't really hear a lot of people talking about this one, and I'd love to have that conversation about it. So that's our Doctorate Level pick for the cannibal subgenre, but I've also got an extra credit movie for you, and this is one that I wanted to talk about again, so to speak, because I did talk about it once previously, ever so slightly. Let me explain. Our extra credit selection today is The Green Inferno. The Green Inferno came out in 2013 and was directed by Eli Roth, who is a divisive horror filmmaker, to say the least. And I actually like most of his movies. I've seen most of his movies and liked them. And I like this one too. And I mentioned this one because it was an homage to Cannibal Holocaust. And when we talked about Cannibal Holocaust, I mentioned this one. And I revisited it after that video, and decided, I wanted to talk about it more. I wanted to give it a little bit more breath than I gave it in that video. So here we go. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a group of activists who go to, I think it's Peru, and they are trying to stop some deforestation efforts by a corporation. But while there, they get kidnapped or apprehended by a mysterious cannibalistic tribe who is holding them to have them over for dinner and not in the way that is complimentary or fun. And they need to try to figure out a way to escape their fate, and hijinks abound, as of course they do in cannibal movies. And I'll stop there so as not spoil the movie for you. But as I noted, it is an homage to the Italian cannibal movies of the 70s and 80s, in particular Cannibal Holocaust and movies like that, Cannibal Ferox and stuff like that. So it really is trying to drive that exploitation aspect home, and I think it's doing a good job of it. It's got Greg Nicotero doing the special effects and the gore effects, and they look really good. They are really, really good and gruesome. And there's a lot of gross out stuff in this movie. And I'll be honest with you, some of it kind of comes off a little juvenile. Eli Roth kind of has a little bit of a juvenile sensibility to him. And some of it does come off as juvenile. Like there's a scene where the woman has to evacuate her bowels, and it's kind of gross, and everybody's kind of grossed out by it and stuff. And, stuff like that feels a little bit kiddish and whatnot. But like when you get like limbs being torn off, and people getting eaten, the flesh getting cooked and eaten and stuff like that. That's very, very effective and very, very gruesome. And of course, the implication of it is additionally gruesome. Like the taboo idea of cannibalism, which is what we've talked about in the previous video, is pretty gruesome in this movie. And not for nothing, there's no animal abuse in this movie. So this is where this movie is better than Cannibal Holocaust. No animals were harmed during the making of this movie. And it kind of shows you how you can make this type of exploitation movie without harming animals, without having sexual assault in there, without having the stuff that is so controversial that makes me hate Cannibal Holocaust. And you're still trying to do something interesting like Cannibal Holocaust did. Like Cannibal Holocaust had the whole idea that the filmmakers were actually more like perverse and depraved than the tribal people who were eating people. And that was an interesting take. In here, you've got this idea of like activists who are not really truly believing in their cause and have ulterior motives, and this idea of capitalism and how capitalism destroys nature and indigenous people and cultures in the name of money, and how prevalent that is and pervasive that is. I'll be honest with you, I don't know that the social commentary hits super well in the movie. I think that Eli Roth is not necessarily nuanced enough or like has a soft enough hand to pull that off in a really compelling way. But I think the effort is interesting, and I do think some of the commentary on activism lands pretty well. If a little bit heavy-handed, I do think it does work. And the acting in the movie is not great. You've got, frankly, some bad actors spouting some bad dialogue, and you kind of don't like any of them. So when they're being tortured and eaten, I'm kind of down for that ride. Again, it leans into that exploitation aspect of it, kind of like a slasher movie where you're not really trying to root for them to get away because they're not really great people. At least I don't like them. So, I thought that worked out pretty good. Like I said, I revisited this movie after talking about it in the previous video. And I just mentioned basically that it was an homage to Cannibal Holocaust. It's a little bit more modern. I remember I liked this movie, but I was kind of like cold on it because it's very clean. It's almost a little too well made, as opposed to like Cannibal Holocaust, where it's very gritty and realistic. Again, it's found footage and stuff like that. This is not a found footage movie, and it's very kind of modern looking in terms of its aesthetic. It's clean. It's the video's sharp quality and stuff like that. And it's almost a little too clean. It's almost a little too theatrical in that sense. But watching it this time around, I really was like, that's kind of okay, because I see what he's doing. He's not trying to make a 70s, 80s cannibal movie. He's just paying homage to them and trying to update it and making it new and modern. And I kind of respect that. And I kind of like that. And so I think he was successful. And I actually enjoyed this movie a lot more this time around. The movie's grown on me in terms of esteem. So much so that I said, you know what, let's talk about it on the channel. Let's give it a little bit more shine, because I actually wound up liking it a lot more than I thought I had liked it. And I liked it before. So, I figured I'd bring it up. And even though it's got its problems, like I said, it's a little too clean. Eli Roth, maybe not the surest hand when it comes to allegory and social messaging. And there's been some critiques of the movie, too, in terms of the depiction of indigenous people as cannibals and savages and stuff like that. And that's kind of controversial. People look at that and say it's not really a great portrayal, and it maybe comes off a little xenophobic or even racist or whatever. And Roth has responded to those comments. He's talked about how, admittedly, kind of deflecting a little bit. He says, like, look, this is an exploitation flick, and you shouldn't be spending your time looking at an exploitation flick when you've got these companies here out here destroying people like this to make money. And sure, that's true, but that's still sidestepping what you've done in the movie. You still have to own what you've done in the movie. And I think what he was trying to say is, look, I'm trying to shine a light on capitalism and greed, and I do think he does that. I don't think he does it super effectively, but I don't care, because what I'm here for is an exploitation cannibal flick, which is what he's trying to do, and he is delivering that, and he's delivering it really well. Like I said, the gore is good in this movie. The story is fine in this movie. The ending kind of lame in this movie, I'm being honest with you, but overall, I really like this movie, and I honestly I like it better than the cannibal movies, especially Cannibal Holocaust. Like, I just don't need that. This is the balance that I like. Again, gory, taboo, extreme, but not offensive, not to me at least. So it might be offensive to other people. If you haven't seen it, be aware, maybe look some stuff up, because like I said, there's some gross stuff in there, some juvenile stuff in there, some upsetting stuff in there, but for the most part, a pretty fun cannibal flick to me. So I'm guessing a lot of you have seen it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree? Was it worth me bringing this one up, or should I have brought something else up? And if I should have brought something else up, let us know in the comments what it is. But that's going to do it for our revisiting of cannibal horror movies. I do like this subgenre a lot. I know a lot of you out there do too. It's a pretty popular subgenre, and the movies in it. Like I said, I've talked about cannibal movies and a lot of other subgenres too, because there's so many of them, and there's so many that are good that it's kind of hard to narrow it down sometimes. But they're fun. I love the gruesome taboo of cannibal horror movies. So hopefully you guys do too, and hopefully I can get into this horror trivia pursuit card that I'm going to look at right now, because this is a tradition here on the channel. I read it on camera, live, don't cut, try to answer it and not embarrass myself. And kind of tripping out because this card's got a hole in it because I think my cat got to it. What are you going to do? Cannibalizing this card, cat. So let's look at the gore category, because cannibals, right? So here's the question. The survivor at the end of 2009's The Human Centipede first sequence forms what segment of the centipede? Front, middle, or back? I'm pretty sure I know this one. We've talked about Human Centipede here on the channel fairly recently, or actually I think we revisited body horror recently, which is where we talked about it. So it feels a little bit fresh in my mind, and I've seen it a few times. I do like that movie quite a bit. I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a little overrated, but I do think it's a lot of fun. And yeah, there's 3 people in the Human Centipede in the first sequence. It's the front, middle, and back. And they're all sewn together end to end. If you don't know what Human Centipede is, if you don't know this movie, yeah, that's what it's about. Somebody gets sewed mouth to anus, mouth to anus, mouth to anus, and makes a chain of people like a centipede. And if you haven't seen this, I guess you could answer this. It's a guess. It's right. It's a 1 in 3 shot, right? So I guess you could take a guess if you don't know this, but I do know this one. And so I'm kind of prattling on a little bit, giving you some time to think about it. But yeah, like Human Centipede, gruesome movie, kind of appropriate to talk about here, even though it's not nearly as gory as you'd think from the premise. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's overrated. It's not nearly as gross and gory as people make it out to be. But the sequel is a whole other story, and we've talked about that a little bit on the channel too, so I'm not going to go into all that. So wrap it up, man. Get your answer locked in. I'm going to answer it now. And so your choices are front, middle, or back. And my answer is, of course, middle. Let's check the card. And the card says middle. Her position serves as punishment for her escape attempt. And that is true, because the person in the middle got it the worst, right? They're attached in the front end and at the back end. And so, yeah, that's a pretty funny answer to the question. But yeah, Human Centipede, not for everybody, but if you haven't checked it out, think about it. I do think it's fun though. But we talked about that already. We've talked about cannibals already. Let's go ahead and wrap up this video. Thank you very much for hanging out. Like I said, if you've got some recommendations for other cool movies, let me know in the comments below. And we'll talk to you next week. But until then, I'm just going to say